Hello and welcome to the Fixture by WICC. I'm your host, Meg Linehan. I'm a staff writer at The Athletic covering the NWSL and US Women's National Team. I have so much news to catch you up on this week. We've got more NWSL Fall Series. We've got another week of fixtures in the WSL. We've got one of the biggest names going over to England to play, and then we've got some power rankings just to stir the pot a little bit. But first, a couple of quick news items from last week's US Soccer Board meeting. I sat in on the public portion of that. Now, the US Women's National Team might still get in some dates in the fall to be determined, but GM Kate Markgraf laid out the plans for 2021 and their Olympic prep this past Saturday. Now, working around the FIFA calendar, you can expect to see a January camp, the return of She Believes Cup, though clearly a lot has to go right for that to actually happen. Plus we've got camp dates in April and June. There's also a Olympic prep specific camp end of June into July, right through July 4th and ahead of the Tokyo Olympics. Now, also expect another U.S. soccer election soon, while former U.S. Women's National Team player Cindy Parlow-Cone stepped into the role of president of the federation. There will be elections this next upcoming annual meeting to fill out the remainder of term for both the president and vice president role. And I've got one more date for you to keep an eye out for that's NWSL related. Plan for the expansion draft for Racing Louisville FC on November 12th. Now, no info yet on how to watch that or the rules, though I think some more coming on that front. This date isn't even official yet with the league, but stay tuned. On the NWSL Fall Series front, I don't know where you are while you're watching this video, but it's finally starting to feel a little bit like fall here in New York City. I've got the long sleeves on. I'm ready for a lot of cozy weekends between now and October watching soccer. And we were supposed to have 3 games this past weekend, but instead we only got 2 after the match between Portland Thorns FC and OL Reign was postponed. Obviously, wildfires are a huge concern on the West Coast. Air quality has also been a major issue in terms of sports. Thorns were actually not even able to practice outside in Providence Park this past week. Now, the team is raising money for wildfire relief, so head on over to the Thorns social media or their website to figure out how you can donate if you are able. Now, while we wait for the game at Providence Park, we still had 2 NWSL games on Saturday, and in a weird twist, both featured red cards. It's not something we see a lot of in the NWSL. Now, first, Spirit beat Chicago Red Stars 2-1 at Segra Field. Chicago's Savannah McCaskill was the player who was ejected via a second yellow card after a pretty gnarly challenge, and the Red Stars really were unfortunate to give up their lead, especially they had really struggled through most of the Challenge Cup to look cohesive in that final third, and it was a really nice bit of teamwork that ended up with Sarah Lubbert scoring their goal. Bailey Feist scored the equalizer for the Washington Spirit in the 71st minute, and Jessie Scarpa found the go-ahead goal for Washington in stoppage time for the win. Now, if we thought that first match was eventful, well, the Challenge Cup winning Houston Dash and the reigning champs of the NWSL regular season and championship for the past couple of years, North Carolina Courage, they were determined to give us a show. Their game got flipped into that CBS broadcast spot via the Portland OL Reign postponement, and while it might not have been a defensive showcase for television, we did get a back-and-forth thriller with 7 goals. Now, if there was one player that absolutely owned the first half, it was Nichelle Prince, who was just absolutely feasting on the space up and down the right wing. Now, she didn't end up on the score sheet with a goal or an assist of her own, but she had some really extremely promising crosses right into the heart of the box. Not her fault she didn't end up on the score sheet. Abby Dahlkemper put the Courage up early via a penalty kick, but the Dash came right back with goals from Veronica Latsko and Christy Mewis, who had a really nice finish of her own. Shea Groom provided the assist on both of those goals. So we go into the start of the second half. Houston is up 2-1 and enter Dabinia. Now, I guess there's always gonna be at least one goal a week where I tell you to pause this here video, go watch that goal, and then come on back, and Dabinia wins that honor in the NWSL this week. Now, but in addition to the rocket that actually started with a nutmeg, she ended up with a brace. Houston was down to 10 for most of the second half, and while the Courage were missing plenty of starters, whether through opt-outs, loans, you name it, they looked considerably more human, but they still had enough for the win. We'll get another look at the Courage this upcoming weekend when they take on the Orlando Pride. That's our first time seeing them for all of 2020 after they missed out on the Challenge Cup. That game is on CBS this upcoming Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern if you're in the United States. Over in the WSL, we're starting to see the line emerge between the top teams and the rest of the field, but there are definitely some questions about a team I think we all expected to be part of the big three clubs. Arsenal and Chelsea, however, absolutely cleaned up with two huge results this past weekend. Gunners dispatching West Ham 9-1, and Chelsea getting 9 different goal scorers in on the action against Bristol City with a 9-0 win. All right, here's the WSL pick for the goal that you need to see this week. Pernille Harder scoring her first, presumably of many, for Chelsea, a nifty backheel finish off a Sam Kerr assist. Now, how brutal must it have been for Bristol City to see Pernille Harder warming up at halftime when you're already down 5-0? Everton edged past Spurs 1-0. Hold that thought on Tottenham. We're going to be talking about them a lot in this video. Manchester United had a very shaky first half against Birmingham City and then really turned it around for a 5-2 win on Sunday. Brand new signing out of UNC, Alessia Russo, NCAA college product, made her debut for United and then added an assist on the final goal. Aston Villa promoted this year, still winless through week 2, falling to Reading FC 3-1. Finally, Brighton and Hove Albion had a very successful defensive performance against Manchester City, holding them to a scoreless draw, earning a point on the road that must have absolutely felt like a win, especially if their reaction after the final whistle was anything to go by. Now, in a fun twist for NWSL viewers, obviously Sam Mewis got the start for Manchester City, but Denise O'Sullivan also made her debut for Brighton as part of her loan in 2020. So we've seen 2 weeks of fixtures in the WSL, which means it is time for the first edition of ICC Power Rankings. Now, I'm not too far off from the table. A lot of these results have been fairly indicative of where these teams are so far, but obviously we've got a lot of new signings still who have yet to make their debut, and some of these teams are going to look very different in October. Now, the real question is Arsenal or Chelsea on top. Right now, I think the edge has to still go to Arsenal, mostly thanks to their plus 13 goal differential through 2 weeks, best in the league. But with the addition of Harder for Chelsea, that's a tight 1-2, extremely subject to change. At 3, I'm going to go with Manchester United, thanks to their strong 5-2 win. Always good to see a second half turnaround. And as we know, Kristen Press and Tobin Heath are still incoming for that team. 4, Manchester City. This is really just on reputation alone. It's kind of reluctant on my part, thanks to their actual performances. This team should be capable of so much more considering their roster. 5, Everton. It's so far so good, but they faced Bristol City and Tottenham, and I want to see how they hold up against the likes of an Arsenal or a Chelsea. I've got Brighton at 6 and Reading FC at 7, followed by West Ham at 8. Yes, they got thrashed by Arsenal, but part of that was a red card, and I'm still kind of intrigued to see what happens when Lyon and Daly really start to get some time together. Spurs right now at number 9. Now finally, it's figuring out the teams without a win. I think Birmingham City deserves some credit for scoring more goals than Aston Villa or Bristol City, so I have them at 10, Aston Villa at 11, and finally Bristol City at 12. Arsenal gets the top spot for that plus 13 goal differential, and then unfortunately for Bristol City, they round us out at minus 13. Now, power rankings, I'm sure everyone has thoughts about power rankings. There's nothing that gets the comment section hopping quite like a power ranking or a best 11, but at the end of the day, we are starting to see these 3 tiers in the league in terms of both expectations and results. And the real challenge for some of these teams is getting into that next tier up and staying there. Okay, so let's talk transfers because we had an absolutely major one this week. Alex Morgan is heading to England. So as I reported with my coworker Paul Tenorio at The Athletic on Friday, Tottenham Hotspur have added the 2-time World Cup winner to their roster, and they went big on the announcement when it became official on Saturday with a billboard in London. Morgan's opted for more games and the training environment that the Spurs can provide rather than the 4 games in Orlando as part of the NWSL Fall Series. Now, it's the right call for a player who hasn't played much at all since winning the World Cup in 2019, and Morgan still very much wants to make that Olympic roster for the US Women's National Team. And yes, she is wearing number 13 for Spurs, so feel free to get those jersey orders in. Now, as these big names like Sam Mewis, Rose Lavelle, Kristen Press, Tobin Heath, Alex Morgan, they've all gone to WSL, and there's been a lot of commentary here in the US about the health of the NWSL and maybe the threat of WSL. Now, this is a very short version of a column that I wrote last week for The Athletic, but there are a number of factors at play here for why these players are choosing to go to England, all this player movement that we're seeing. The impact of COVID-19 still cannot be overlooked, especially with the NWSL having a limited number of games that will be done by October 17th. But even setting aside some of the factors that may have led to US Women's National Team players looking abroad, I'd like to argue that it's actually a good thing for both leagues, the NWSL and the FA WSL, to have increased competition. We don't really need to worry about the NWSL yet. Multiple expansion teams are on the way. There's more and increased expansion interest, right? New sponsors, their media rights deals with CBS and Twitch. Reports of the NWSL's demise have been greatly exaggerated. But the WSL's rise this fall is a challenge, and not just one to the NWSL either. We're in a new age of women's football. We've seen what happens when real investment happens, and it's a great thing. The NWSL needs some pressure from Europe and the rest of the world. Set aside all those arguments about what's the best league in the world for just a minute, and just think about how this increased investment and increased viewership and increased competition is going to force everyone to get better. Okay, that's it for this week's edition of the Fixture by WICC. Thank you, as always, for watching. You can find me at It's Meg Linehan on Twitter and Instagram, and make sure you're following at ICC Women, both of those same places on Twitter and Instagram. You're always going to want to like the International Champions Cup page on Facebook, so that way you never miss a video, including all of our videos right here on the Fixture by WICC. I'll be back with you next week.